March 7, 1945. 35,000 feet above the azure waters of the Philippine Sea, Lieutenant Commander Minoru Genda gazed out from the cockpit of his Mitsubishi A6M0. The morning sun glinted off his canopy as he led a flight of 12 fighters toward an intercept point. Weather conditions were perfect, clear skies with unlimited visibility. A day made for aerial combat. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What Lieutenant Commander Genda and the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service would discover that day would shatter their fundamental assumptions about American air capabilities and force a profound reassessment of Japan's defensive strategy during the final months of the Pacific War. The crackling radio pulled Genda back to the moment. Hayate leader, this is command. B-29 formation detected approaching from bearing 120, altitude 3200. Estimated arrival over Nakajima aircraft plant in 90 minutes. Understood, Genda replied, adjusting his oxygen mask. Moving to intercept. At 41 years old, Genda was considered ancient by fighter pilot standards, a Naval Academy graduate and one of the principal architects of the Pearl Harbor attack. He had volunteered to return to combat operations as the war situation deteriorated. His experience was desperately needed. Since November 1944, the American B-29 superfortresses had been hammering Tokyo and other Japanese cities with increasing regularity. Though fearsome, the B-29 raids followed predictable patterns. The American bombers, operating from bases in the Mariana Islands some 500 miles away, would arrive alone, without fighter escort. This limitation was a simple matter of geography and technology. The American fighters simply lacked the range to accompany the bombers all the way to Japan and back. This certainty formed the cornerstone of Japanese air defense strategy. All units maintain discipline, Genda instructed his pilots. Remember your training. The Americans will be vulnerable once they cross the coastline. Among his pilots was Flight Petty Officer Saburo Sakai, a veteran ace with 64 confirmed aerial victories. Commander, Sakai's voice came through the radio. Something feels different today. The morning patrol reported unusual American activity around Iwo Jima. Noted, Sakai-san, Genda replied. But Iwo Jima is still 750 miles from Tokyo. Whatever they're doing there won't affect today's intercept. Across the vast Pacific, in a ready room on Iwo Jima, Major James Tapp of the 15th Fighter Group briefed his pilots. The island had been declared secure just days earlier after one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific campaign. Its airfields were now operational, dramatically altering the strategic equation. Gentlemen, this is what we've been waiting for, Tapp said, pointing to a map showing the route to Tokyo. For the first time, we'll be providing direct escort for the B-29s all the way to the target. That's 650 miles from Iwo to Tokyo. First Lieutenant John Vogt raised his hand. Sir, that's pushing the absolute limit of our range, even with the drop tanks. That's why we've modified these P-51Ds specifically for this mission, Tapp explained. Each Mustang has been stripped of excess weight, gun camera equipment removed, ammunition load reduced, and we've added the new 110-gallon drop tanks. Intelligence reports the Japanese have no idea we can reach them. They'll be expecting unescorted bombers. Captain William Dunham examined the fuel consumption charts. We'll be running on fumes coming home. That's why timing is everything, Tapp said. The B-29s will hit the Nakajima plant at exactly 1100 hours. We'll rendezvous with them 30 minutes prior, escort through the target, then head straight back. Every minute we dogfight costs precious fuel for the return journey. Questions. Technical Sergeant Raymond Miller spoke up. Sir, what about the Zeros? They'll climb above us to attack. True, but they're not expecting us at all. The element of surprise is ours today. Plus, remember your advantages. Your Merlin engines perform better at altitude than their radials. Your dive speed is superior. Use that energy wisely. At the same moment, 300 miles southeast of Iwo Jima, Colonel Gerald Williams addressed the B-29 crews of the 73rd Bomb Wing in a separate briefing. "Men, today is different," Williams said, his voice echoing in the cavernous briefing room. "For the first time, we'll have fighter escort all the way to Tokyo and back. The 15th and 21st Fighter Groups will rendezvous with us here." He pointed to a spot on the map. "That's approximately 100 miles off the Japanese coast. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. The Japanese believe their homeland is beyond the reach of our fighters. Today, that changes." The data was compelling. Since operations began from the Marianas, B-29 losses had averaged 6% per mission. Without fighter escort, the big bombers were vulnerable to the swarms of Japanese interceptors that rose to meet them. The toll in men and machines was becoming unsustainable. The 73rd Bomb Wing alone had lost 114 superfortresses in the previous 4 months, along with their 11-man crews. Back in Japanese airspace, Commander Genda led his formation higher, climbing to 35,000 feet to gain the altitude advantage for their diving attacks. The morning sun, now at their backs, would blind the American gunners. "Command reports 73 B-29s approaching," Genda informed his pilots. "They appear to be taking the usual approach corridor." In the cockpit of his Zero, Sakai mentally reviewed the choreography of the coming interception. First, they would position themselves above and ahead of the bomber formation. Then they would dive through, focusing fire on the formation leaders and aircraft displaying battle damage. The Zero, though outclassed in many respects by newer fighters, still possessed excellent maneuverability and climbing ability. Its 20mm cannon could tear through a B-29's aluminum skin with devastating effect. 5 minutes to intercept, Genda announced. Final weapons check. In the lead B-29, aptly named Tokyo Express, Bombardier Lieutenant Robert Maxwell made final adjustments to the Norden bomb site. Pilot Captain Edward Russell monitored the gauges of the 4 Wright R-3350 engines, each producing 200 horsepower. The superfortress cruised at 240 miles per hour, carrying a payload of 4,500-pound bombs. "Fighter escort should be joining us any minute," Russell said over the intercom. "If they make it," Maxwell replied skeptically. "That's a hell of a long trip for a P-51. Navigator First Lieutenant Samuel Pressler checked his charts. "We're exactly on course and on time. If they're coming, they'll be here soon." On Iwo Jima, the P-51 Mustangs of the 15th and 21st Fighter Groups had taken off an hour earlier. Now, 108 of the sleek fighters, each powered by a Packard-built version of the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, raced northwest at 30,000 feet. The Mustangs carried minimal ammunition, only enough for a few short bursts from their 650 caliber machine guns. Every ounce of excess weight had been removed to extend their range. Major Tapp checked his fuel gauge. The needle was falling faster than he'd like. "All units, switch to external tanks. Save your internals for the trip home." In his P-51D, named Miss Virginia, Lieutenant John Vogel kept his eyes scanning the vast blue expanse. "I've got them," he finally called out. "B-29 formation at 11 o'clock, maybe 15 miles. "Right on schedule," Tapp responded. "All units, form up on the bombers. Let's give these boys some company for the trip into town." In the lead Zero, Commander Genda was the first to spot the approaching bomber formation. They were still 20 miles out, but the massive silver aircraft were unmistakable against the blue sky. He raised his binoculars to count the formation when something unusual caught his eye. Smaller specks moving alongside the bombers. "What is that?" he muttered to himself, adjusting the focus. Then the recognition hit him like a physical blow. "Fighters! American fighters! All units be advised, the B-29s have escort." "Impossible," came Sakai's immediate response. "Must be Navy fighters from their carriers." "No," Gender replied, his voice tight with tension. "These are P-51 Mustangs, at least 3 squadrons of them." In his cockpit, Sakai felt a cold knot form in his stomach. If American fighters could reach Tokyo, everything changed. The home islands were no longer beyond reach. How is this possible? Their range... They must be flying from Iwo Jima, Gender realized, the strategic implications unfolding rapidly in his mind. We've miscalculated badly. In the lead B-29, the crew erupted in cheers as the Mustangs took up formation around them. Captain Russell grinned behind his oxygen mask. "Would you look at that beautiful sight? Mustangs, all the way out here?" The P-51s slid gracefully into position, their distinctive airframes, with their bubble canopies and laminar flow wings, instantly recognizable. Each carried bright invasion stripes on the wings and fuselage, white and black bands to prevent friendly fire incidents. "Tokyo Express, this is Mustang Leader." Tap's voice came over the radio. "We'll be your escorts for the remainder of this excursion. Welcome to the neighborhood." "Law, much obliged, Mustang Leader," Russell replied. "Been getting a bit lonely out here without you fellows." In his Zero, Gender made a rapid recalculation. His 12 fighters now faced not just the B-29's defensive armament, but over 100 P-51 Mustangs, arguably the finest fighter aircraft of the war. The Americans had achieved complete tactical surprise. "New plan," Gender instructed his pilots. "We engage from multiple directions. Focus on the bombers first. The fighters will be low on fuel and cannot afford extended combat." Sakai voiced his concern. "Commander, with respect, we're outnumbered 9-1. "We have no choice," Gender replied grimly. "Tokyo is depending on us." From his position in the formation, Major Tap spotted the Japanese fighters first. Zeros at 2 o'clock high. Looks like they're setting up for a diving attack. Blue Squadron moved to intercept. The rest maintain bomber escort. In the lead Zero, Gender watched as a section of Mustangs broke formation and climbed toward them. The American pilots were confident, aggressive. "They're coming to meet us," he observed. "All units, select your targets and prepare to engage." What followed was unlike any aerial combat yet seen over Japan. The Zeros began their diving attacks, only to be met head-on by the climbing Mustangs. The first engagement was brief, but violent. Lieutenant Frank Carson's Mustang met a Zero head-on, both pilots firing simultaneously. The Zero's lighter airframe shuddered under the impact of 6 50-caliber machine guns, while Carson's P-51 took a hit from the Zero's 20mm cannon. The Japanese fighter erupted into flames and fell away, while Carson's Mustang trailed smoke from a damaged radiator. "I'm hit," Carson called out. "Heading back to Iwo." "Understood," Tap replied. "Conserve your fuel. You've got a long trip home." In his Zero, Sakai executed a tight turn, bringing his guns to bear on a B-29 that had fallen slightly out of formation. Before he could fire, a Mustang flashed across his path, forcing him to break off. He pulled back on the stick, executing a climbing turn that few other aircraft could match. The maneuver should have given him position behind the P-51, but the American pilot didn't pursue. Instead, the Mustang returned to its escort position. "They're not taking the bait," Sakai radioed to Gender. "They're staying disciplined, protecting the bombers." "They're conserving fuel," Gender realized. "They know exactly how much they need to get home." The aerial battle continued as the formation approached the Japanese mainland. Unlike previous raids, where the B-29s were forced into evasive maneuvers by the attacking fighters, Today's formation maintained perfect cohesion, their escort Mustangs keeping the Japanese interceptors at bay. In Tokyo, at Imperial Japanese Army Air Force Headquarters, Colonel Teruhiko Kobayashi received the alarming reports. "Sir, our interceptors report P-51 Mustangs escorting the B-29s, his aide informed him. "That's not possible," Kobayashi said dismissively. "The closest American fighter base is Iwo Jima, nearly 750 miles away. The P-51's maximum range is—" He stopped mid-sentence, reaching for a technical manual. After quickly flipping through pages, his expression darkened. "Get me the latest intelligence on American modifications to the P-51, and contact all air defense units. If this is true, we need to completely revise our defensive strategy." Aboard the Tokyo Express, Bombardier Maxwell had a clear view of the engagement through the plexiglass nose of the B-29. "Never thought I'd see the day," he remarked. "P-51s mixing it up with Zeros over Tokyo Bay." "Times are changing," Navigator Pressler replied. 10 minutes to target. Everyone ready for the bomb run." As the formation crossed the Japanese coastline, additional interceptors rose to meet them. A mixed force of Kawasaki Ki-61 Hiens and Nakajima Ki-84 Hayates, the latest Japanese fighter designs, joined the battle. Gender recognized that the tactical situation had fundamentally changed. "All units, new approach. Focus on disrupting the bomber formation. Do not engage the Mustangs directly unless necessary." In his P-51, Major Tapp watched the Japanese tactics shift. "They're going for the bombers exclusively now. All squadrons, tighten up escort. Remember, we need 20 minutes of fuel reserve for the return trip." The cost in Japanese aircraft was staggering. Every attempted attack on the bomber formation met fierce resistance from the Mustangs. The P-51's superior speed, particularly in a dive, allowed them to intercept the Japanese fighters before they could reach their targets. When combat did occur, the Mustang's 650 caliber machine guns often proved decisive against the lightly armored Japanese aircraft. In his Damage Zero, Sakai watched a Ki-61 explode after a brief burst from a Mustang's guns. The American fighters were demonstrating not just technical superiority, but tactical discipline that spoke of extensive combat experience. They weren't being drawn into extended dogfights or aerobatic contests, where the more maneuverable Japanese fighters might have an advantage. Instead, they used hit-and-run tactics, maintaining energy and position. "Commander," Sakai radioed to Gender, "we need reinforcements if we're to have any impact." "None are coming," Gender replied. "All available units are already engaged." The reality was stark. Japan's aircraft production had fallen dramatically due to material shortages and bombing. Fuel was critically scarce, limiting training for new pilots. The veteran pilots like Gender and Sakai were increasingly rare exceptions in a force now populated largely by hastily trained replacements with minimal flight hours. In stark contrast, the Americans displayed not just material superiority, but a level of training and coordination that spoke of their industrial and organizational advantages. Each P-51 represented approximately 12 Indo-Zero man-hours of production and a pilot with at least 400 hours of flight training. The B-29 was even more resource-intensive, requiring over 55 Zero-Zeren man-hours to produce and crews with specialized training in high-altitude precision bombing. As the formation approached the target, the Nakajima aircraft plant, the B-29s moved into their bombing run, maintaining a perfect line that would maximize the concentration of bombs on the target. The Mustangs maintained their protective screen, though fuel concerns were becoming critical. 2-minute warning, came the call from the lead B-29. "Bomb bay doors opening." In the streets below, air raid sirens had been wailing for the past 30 minutes. Civilians and factory workers rushed to shelters, though these offered little real protection against the 500-pound bombs the B-29s carried. At precisely 11, 00 hours, the first bombs fell from Tokyo Express, followed in sequence by the rest of the formation. Over 400 bombs descended on the Nakajima plant, one of Japan's few remaining aircraft production facilities. Major Tapp watched the precision of the bombing run with satisfaction. "Textbook delivery," he commented to his wingman. "Now comes the hard part, getting home." As the B-29s completed their bombing run and turned south toward the open ocean, the Japanese fighters made a final, desperate series of attacks. Commander Genda led a formation of 6 remaining Zeros in a frontal assault on the lead bomber group. "This is our last chance," he told his pilots. "We must disrupt their formation." The Zeros dove through a hail of defensive fire from the B-29s. 50 caliber turrets. 2 Japanese fighters erupted in flames immediately. Genda pressed his attack, focusing on a B-29 that displayed the telltale signs of a squadron leader. His 20mm cannon shells struck the bomber's No. 3 engine, which began trailing smoke. Before he could press his advantage, 3 Mustangs intercepted his flight. Lieutenant Vogel's P-51 caught Genda's wingman with a deflection shot that tore off the Zero's wing. Another P-51 damaged a second Zero, forcing it to break off. Genda found himself alone, facing multiple American fighters. With fuel running low and his ammunition nearly depleted, he made the difficult decision to disengage. "All units, break off attack. Return to base." As the Japanese fighters withdrew, the bomber formation continued south, still under escort from the Mustangs. Major Tapp checked his fuel gauge. The needle hovered just above the quarter mark. "All P-51 units will escort the bombers for another 15 minutes. Then we need to head for home. Conserve fuel at all costs." In his damaged B-29, Captain Walter Higgins fought to maintain control as smoke filled the cockpit. "No. 3 engine is gone," he reported. "We're losing altitude." "Can you make it back to base?" Tapp asked over the radio. "Negative," Higgins replied. "We'll try for an emergency landing at Iwo Jima, but I'm not optimistic." "I'll assign 2 Mustangs to escort you," Tapp decided. "The rest of us need to head back now." This difficult calculus, which damaged bomber to escort, how long to remain with the formation, when to break for home, represented the harsh realities of long-range aerial warfare. Every minute spent in combat or escort duty meant less fuel for the return journey across 650 miles of open ocean. At 11:45 hours, the main force of Mustangs broke away from the bomber formation. "B-29s, you're on your own from here," Tapp radioed. "Good hunting, and we'll see you back at the ranch." "Thanks for the company," came the reply from the bomber command. "First round's on us tonight." As the P-51s turned southeast toward Iwo Jima, the pilots reduced power, retracted their landing gear doors to reduce drag, and began flying the precise fuel conservation course they had been briefed on. Every pilot knew that running out of fuel over the Pacific meant almost certain death. Lieutenant Vogel checked his instruments carefully. "I'm showing less fuel than expected, Major." "The combat maneuvering cost us," Tapp replied. "Everyone switched to lean mixture and reduce RPM to 1800. We need to stretch every drop." Back in Tokyo, the extent of the damage was becoming clear. The Nakajima plant had taken direct hits on its main production buildings and assembly areas. Production would be halted for weeks, if not months. More significantly, the psychological impact of fighter-escorted bombers reaching Tokyo had profound implications. Colonel Kobayashi prepared his report for Imperial headquarters. The statistics were grim. 23 Japanese fighters lost against 3 B-29s and 2 P-51s confirmed destroyed, but the strategic implications were far more severe. "With American fighters now capable of reaching Tokyo," he wrote, "our entire air defense strategy must be reconsidered. The B-29s no longer need to operate individually or at night to avoid interception. They can now fly in large daylight formations with fighter protection, dramatically increasing their bombing accuracy." At a hastily convened staff meeting, Kobayashi presented the new reality to his superiors. "Gentlemen, today marks a fundamental shift in the air war," he began. "American industrial capacity has solved what we believed was an insurmountable geographical challenge. Their P-51 Mustangs operating from Iwo Jima can now escort bombers all the way to Tokyo." General Saburo Endo, head of Homeland Air Defense, studied the map showing the distance from Iwo Jima to Tokyo. "How is this possible? Our intelligence indicated their fighters lacked the range. They've modified their aircraft," Kobayashi explained, "reduced weight, added fuel capacity, and developed specialized flight techniques to conserve fuel. But the fundamental issue is industrial capacity. They can produce these modifications quickly and in large numbers. We cannot." The implications were clear to everyone present. Japan's strategy had relied heavily on attriting the unescorted B-29s. Now, with fighter escort, the Americans could operate with near impunity over the home islands. "What are our options?" General Endo asked. "Limited," Kobayashi admitted. "We can try to intercept them earlier over the ocean, but that further stretches our own fuel reserves. We can focus on attacking Iwo Jima to disrupt their fighter operations, but our naval and air capabilities for such strikes are increasingly limited." The unspoken reality hung in the air. Japan was losing the war of production by staggering margins. American industrial output for 1944 included over 96 Zu-0 aircraft compared to Japan's 28 Zu-0. The United States was producing more P-51 Mustangs in a single month than Japan was producing all fighter types combined. As night fell, the surviving Japanese pilots debriefed at their respective bases. Commander Genda met with Sakai and the 4 other pilots who had returned from their unit. "What we witnessed today changes everything," Genda told them soberly. "The Americans have effectively closed the ring around our homeland. Their pilots showed excellent discipline," Sakai observed. "They never allowed themselves to be drawn away from their escort duties. And their aircraft performance was superior in almost every respect," added Lieutenant Yoshino, whose Zero had taken damage to its rudder controls. "Their speed, firepower, and high-altitude performance exceeded ours significantly." Genda nodded grimly. "But what's most significant is their industrial capability. The modifications to extend the P-51's range weren't theoretical breakthroughs. They were practical engineering solutions implemented across hundreds of aircraft in a matter of weeks." On Iwo Jima, as the P-51s began returning, ground crews counted each aircraft anxiously. The mission had stretched the Mustangs to the absolute limit of their endurance. Some pilots reported having less than 15 minutes of fuel remaining upon landing. Major Tapp was among the last to land, his fuel gauge reading empty as he touched down. As he climbed from his cockpit, he was met by the wing commander, Colonel Robert Landry. "How'd we do?" Landry asked. "We lost 2, confirmed maybe 3 more that were damaged enough they might not have made it back," Tapp reported. "But we got the bombers to the target and back with minimal losses. The Japanese were completely surprised to see us." "The strategic implications are enormous," Landry said. "With fighter escort, the effectiveness of the bombing campaign just multiplied significantly. The statistics told the story. In previous unescorted raids on the Nakajima plant, an average of 8% of the attacking B-29s had been lost. Today, with fighter escort, that figure had dropped to less than 4%, and bombing accuracy had improved dramatically since the bombers could maintain tight formation rather than taking evasive action against interceptors. In his after-action report, Colonel Williams of the 73rd Bomb Wing noted the transformation. The presence of P-51 escort fighters fundamentally alters the strategic bombing equation. The enemy was forced to divide his attention between our bombers and the escort fighters, reducing the effectiveness of his interceptions significantly. Moreover, the psychological impact on enemy pilots was evident in their tactics and aggression level. The March 7, 1945 mission marked the beginning of a new phase in the strategic bombing campaign against Japan. In the weeks that followed, P-51 escorts became standard for daylight operations against priority targets. By April, over 100 B-29s escorted by 200 Mustangs were striking targets simultaneously, overwhelming the declining Japanese air defenses. For Commander Genda and the remaining veteran Japanese pilots, the reality was increasingly grim. In his private diary, Genda wrote, "Today we witnessed American technological and industrial superiority in its clearest form. Their bombers now come with fighter escort all the way to our capital. We face not just superior aircraft, but an enemy who can solve complex logistical and engineering challenges through sheer productive capacity." The statistics that most troubled Genda and Japanese leadership were not the technical specifications of the aircraft involved, but the production figures. By spring 1945, the United States was producing 500 Mustangs per month, while Japanese fighter production had fallen below 900 aircraft of all types. American aircrew training produced 3 Zuo new pilots monthly, flying an average of 400 hours before combat. Japanese training programs, hampered by fuel shortages, now graduated pilots with fewer than 100 flight hours. The technological surprise of fighter-escorted B-29s reaching Tokyo was ultimately less significant than what it represented. America's ability to overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges through industrial might and organizational efficiency. For Lieutenant Commander Minoru Genda, who had helped plan the attack on Pearl Harbor 3 years earlier, the irony was inescapable. The surprise attack that had drawn America into the war had awakened an industrial giant whose productive capacity Japan had gravely underestimated. Now, that same industrial might was bringing the war directly to Japan's doorstep in ways they had believed impossible. In his final entry on the subject, Genda wrote, "When we planned the Pearl Harbor attack, we knew we could not win a prolonged war against American industry. We hoped to secure a negotiated peace before their industrial advantage became decisive. Today, I witnessed the failure of that strategy firsthand. Their fighters now reach our capital. Their production exceeds ours by factors I cannot even calculate. The war is lost, though few will admit it openly." History would prove Genda correct. The ability to escort B-29s with P-51 Mustangs from Iwo Jima to Tokyo and back represented not just a tactical innovation, but the culmination of American industrial and logistical superiority. The Japanese pilots, who never expected to face Mustangs over Tokyo, encountered not just a new aircraft, but the full weight of America's war production, a force that would ultimately prove decisive in bringing the Pacific War to its conclusion. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.